Hello and welcome to another podcast, Mindset, Money, Success, where I cover a lot of topics about mindset, money and success, but also around taboo subjects like domestic abuse and gender violence. And today I have a guest, Carrie Bower. Hello, Carrie. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Loraine. So my name's Carrie, and I am really passionate about raising the visibility of women in mid and later life who are affected by trauma and domestic abuse. And I work in the ageing sector in charity, by day and by not by night, but outside of work. I write quite a lot of blogs and I have a podcast called Let's Get Visible.
That's brilliant. I also noticed that you work as a freelance trainer for Victim Focus. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I discovered Dr. Jessica Taylor's work probably about 5 years ago now, and have a real interest in kind of how trauma is often pathologized. So many women in mid and later life who've been affected by any form of trauma, but domestic abuse specifically, will often receive a diagnosis of some sort of mental health condition. That's really common. And often the framing is it's in your head rather than actually this is a response to what's happened to you. And I come from a long history of mental health nurses. So as a child, I grew up in an environment around kind of that medical model of mental health. And first of all, I actually read her second book, Sexy But Psycho. And I just it was like the penny was dropping. I was reading through it thinking, wow, yeah, I can see this. I can see how women have been pathologized in this way. And then I read her first book, Why Women Are Blamed for Everything. And that really sort of clicked into place as well. So I started to really align with her work. She's also from kind of the Midlands, which isn't that far away from where I live. And I just really related to her, the way she spoke. She was sort of no nonsense talk. So I started looking at her website, Victim Focus, and done a few bits and pieces of her training. But then I got funding from my employer to do her Train the Trainer course, which was quite intensive. I think it was about 40 hours worth of training over a month. And I just felt like I did a lot of unlearning. So I'm now qualified to deliver understanding trauma-informed practice. So really unpacking that kind of pathologization of women and girls particularly. And also there's a module around victim blaming and self-blame in sexual violence and domestic abuse. So yeah, and sort of my own lived experience, I felt like all my life experience and professional experience all sort of came together. And it wasn't learning, it was a lot of unlearning. So yeah, I do that outside of work as well.
Yeah, that's great. I'm also a fan of Dr. Jessica as well, and I've delved into her website, Victim Focus. I found a lot of materials there as well, which can help, obviously, the victims of trauma, especially ones who have been through more hidden forms of abuse, like economic abuse, financial abuse, and the other things like emotional and psychological abuse as well. Because I think a lot of women don't really understand that. And I didn't understand it. And the actual crime that is registered in the UK since 2015, which is coercive controlling behaviour, it doesn't say anything to me when I understood about that crime. I'm thinking, well, what does it mean? Right? It doesn't help women to understand if they're in an abusive relationship or not, because it doesn't mean anything. I think it's a term that was created by Dr. Is it Evan Stark?
Evan Stark, yeah.
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 So it is, a little bit of unknown that people out there don't really understand what it's all about. And I know that I've listened to a couple of your podcasts as well, and you were talking to recently Sam Beckinsale.
Yeah, yeah.
And a lot of what she said was resonating with me as well, because
Mm.
the stereotyping of victims and things like that. You know, so it needs to be what you actually say, let's get visible. It needs to be taken out of the box that it's in and then opened up. I don't know if you
I
think it's,
agree. I sort of think of it as a bit of a petri dish, and with that lid over it, it's just breeding, isn't it? And
yeah,
actually, by taking the lid off and talking about the topic and how insidious it is, it's really, really hard when you're in the middle of it to
mm,
spot it. It creeps up over such a long period of time often. It's really difficult, and particularly for a woman in mid or later life who's maybe been in that for decades.
yeah,
The laws have changed, the language has changed. It's only recently that we've even started using abuse instead of violence. So in our heads, we often think of a man hitting a woman. That's domestic violence. That's really clear, isn't it? But
yes,
often violence isn't physical. And Sam said, actually, the impact on our mind is physical. The
mm,
trauma is physical, but actually the physical act might not be there. And often you'll hear somebody say, well, he didn't hit me,
yeah,
so it can't be domestic abuse. Well, actually, domestic abuse is so much more than that. People learn to exert power and control in a variety of ways,
mm,
and it can be really insidious and drip by drip. Before you know it, you're in that fog and you can't see it.
yeah, exactly. And for women who have been 10 or 20, or 30 years in a relationship, I can just imagine how difficult it would be at the end of a relationship like that to put yourself back together. It's because I've been through what I explained as like maximum hurt, maximum
Mm.
damage. So grief and trauma, anxiety, panic attacks, all of these things at the end of a relationship. And of course, the emotions are all over the place. So you look deranged. You
Yes.
actually look deranged because one minute you can be fine, and then something happens, somebody says something, and then you're like an angry monster because they didn't understand. They've said something that's triggered you, right? Like people blame the victim all the time.
Mm.
Just move on. And, you probably got lots yourself that that these victim blaming stereotype things, even women who go into the courts and family courts. And I think women are now becoming more aware. And
Yeah, there is an awakening.
there's one or two, especially younger ones, who are now standing up and saying, hold on a minute, I'm going to take this person to court over what they have said in court. And she was successful. Just recently, there's a woman who was successful in taking her the other party's lawyer who'd said
Right, yes, I
something.
think I've seen, yeah,
Yeah.
seen that
And I
case. Yeah.
thought, great, fantastic. Because things are moving, but it's really slowly. I mean, if you think it's been since 2015, this coercive control and behavior has been a crime. But when
Yeah.
women have like sought legal advice, and there's a lot of women out there have said exactly the same, they go to seek the legal advice. Well, it's very difficult to prove emotional and psychological abuse. And of course, they don't even mention coercive control and
No,
behaviors
no.
because I think some of the lawyers don't even understand what it's all about. So I don't know if you've come across any of that yourself.
Yeah, and it takes a long time for people to catch up with the law, and that's even professionals. I mean, even as I was a social worker back in the early 2000s, and I would work with, and I had very little domestic abuse training as a social worker, and I think that's a bit of a myth that people think that
Yeah.
that professionals working with people have the knowledge. They don't. And often they might be professionals that are also experiencing domestic abuse themselves and can't see the wood for the trees. So I think it's an awakening that needs to happen across society, everybody, and realize that actually that kind of typical victim just doesn't exist, and a typical perpetrator really doesn't exist either.
No.
But yeah, certainly professional awareness is really quite an all-time low, and when you work in this sector you think everybody must know by now, but actually they don't, even with social media. And like you say, younger people are starting to have this awakening, starting to learn, but there is a forgotten generation who either are aware but don't know, don't see themselves in campaigns, don't see themselves as worthy victims, because we live in a very ageist society as well. But also, they might not even recognise what they've been experiencing is domestic abuse. And certainly, going back to what I was saying, when I worked with people, often I just thought, oh, this is a traditional marriage. I was in my 20s, I didn't really know what a healthy relationship was. I'd been brought up by a mum on her own, because my father was quite abusive. So I hadn't had that framework either. And that's really common. Lots of people have had that. So actually, even as a professional with lots of training, I was going into people's homes and seeing something through a very different lens. And I reflect on missed opportunities. Or I had a really privileged role where I actually got to know people for quite a long time. I developed really quite in-depth relationships with people, which is a real privilege, because nowadays professionals don't have that joy. But often, because I listened, and because I was open to unlearning some things, people did disclose things to me. They didn't call it domestic abuse, they called it something else. But often, now I can reflect and think, actually, that person was reaching out to me and I missed it. Now, the law wasn't on their side at the time. There wasn't laws to protect them. But actually, it's really made me think about how many women in particular are living in utter misery, but keeping themselves safe, modifying their behaviour. And their perpetrators got full power and control. So actually doesn't really need to do a huge amount. It could be a look, knowing a consequence. I mean, I worked with a couple in their 90s a long time ago, and he would just take out his hearing aids. And she told me in the last few days of her life what that meant. And I witnessed that numerous times. I had no idea what that meant. She told me what that meant, and I won't share that here. But, perpetrators get really good at honing their skills. And often, perpetrators that have been doing that for a very long time become extremely skilled at hiding it from the rest of the world. So like you say, a victim survivor can appear like they're going mad, and often the world tells them they're going mad.
I mean, I can remember actually opening up to someone in a message to say, I think I'm losing my marbles, is what I wrote to this woman, because of some of the things that I was reading from emails that were being sent and text messages that were being sent to me after the end of our relationship. So I did feel as if I was the crazy person. Besides, I was blaming myself. I felt that it was all my fault, and I was the guilty party, And it took a while to work out what was wrong, until I ended up watching a lot of videos on YouTube. Dr. Ramani and Sam
Oh, yes.
and these types of videos. And then everything fell into place, and it was like a shock to the system, total shock to the system, to learn everything about that particular type of personality, and then think, oh my God, at the end of a relationship, and look past and go, well, I never really seen the red flags. So that was
Red
my,
flags are very easy to spot in hindsight or when
they
you're on the
are,
outside. When you're in it, it's mixed with love, isn't it? And all
of
that
course,
self-doubt and an erosion of your confidence because they've done a great job at completely breaking you down.
exactly. Because
Yeah.
there's a gift picture that I actually found, and it's a big daisy, and it's got he loves me not, he loves me, he loves me not.
Oh, do you know, that brings back memories.
And
Yeah.
it was like, you remember when you were a little
Yeah,
kid picking the
I
daisies
do.
and flinging the leaves up, he loves me not. Well, that's how I termed the relationship, because that's what it was
That,
like.
yeah.
Up, down, up,
And
down.
that's
It's like,
really destabilizing,
and
isn't
it's a
it?
roller coaster.
Yeah. Yeah. But
Mm.
that's not in your head. That's
No,
what he's done to you. But
exactly. Because
for
one
so
minute
many
it's,
people, and then because you are reacting to that, you reinforce the is she going crazy? Is she mad? Is she unwell? And then also, this is why I'm really focused on midlife as well, because I think there's a real opportunity to reach women in midlife before
mm,
they enter later life, because I think it is so much more complex to end a relationship in later life. Even a healthy relationship is going to be really complex,
yes.
but an unhealthy relationship, an abusive relationship will be so much harder. But if
Mm,
we think about it, in our 40s and 50s, we're also being affected by our hormonal changes. So we've got perimenopause, menopause to contend with. And some of those feelings, I don't know about you, but for me, my perimenopause started about 5 years ago, and I felt like I was going mad. I had brain fog. It really affected my confidence. I hadn't had a hot flush. I wasn't at that stage. I hadn't had any of the signs that you really associate with perimenopause. It was that feeling of just being out of sorts. And
mm,
actually, quite a lot of that is quite similar to when you've been gaslit
yeah,
and coercively controlled. So, for a woman who's experiencing both, no wonder they feel like they're going mad. It's completely understandable, isn't it?
yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, some of the things that you can be told, because it's like devaluation, it's humiliation, and like you said, it's the chip away. And I didn't even realize that until afterwards. And it seems very strange not to have understood at the time. I mean, I wasn't a really angry person, or like didn't really react to things, because I'm one of these where it's like, it just goes over, you know. And I did used to have what I'd say is like a nervous laughter, embarrassment, humiliation, and stuff like that. Because if, say, for example, we're in company, and then he gets really angry and he starts shouting in my ear for something while I'm driving or whatever, then I would have that nervous laughter, because I was like, oh my, he's showing himself up. Is you know, he's being really angry and shouting at me when there's other people in the car and I'm trying to drive. It was so really bizarre for
It's
me
also
to,
another way to mask, isn't it? Laughter and banter and
yeah,
humour is another way to kind of, it's all okay, and it's just having a moment. Because we naturally want to make everything okay.
yeah, that's it. And you smooth it over. And I
Mm.
think what women do as well is like they make excuses. Oh, well, he's frustrated, or well, he's really busy with work. He's got a lot on his plate, or he's not very well and he's got all of this pain, or even, well, he's had too much to drink. I just want to give a quick promotion to my Success with Loraine brand that I launched a few weeks ago. These are my merch that are available on my website, successwithloraine.com/merch.
And these are the designs. The self-care design in t-shirts and sweatshirts in the UK, Spain and the US through Amazon. There is also the narcissist aware sweatshirt, which is not a possession, not a plaything, I'm a person. And that is also available through Amazon, UK, Spain and US. Narcissist aware merch. And there is the Enough is Enough t-shirt, and again this is the narcissist aware merch, and it's available in these colours. And the self-care merch, this one is t-shirt that says think positively, exercise daily, eat healthily, shine bright, stay strong, worry less, be happy, love more. And again, that's available in different colours and also in UK, Spain and the US. These are the merch that are available at the moment, and keep checking back for more. Thanks.
Yeah, we're nurtured from a very,
excuses.
very young age to be empathetic, to think about others, to put others' comfort before ourselves. So yeah, I mean, you know, we can say we're partly responsible, but we're not. Society, it's our upbringing. It's kind of all the messaging, the insidious messaging. I mean, I remember on the back of my door as a little girl, I had sugar and spice and all things nice. That's what little girls are made of. And then my brother in the next room had the other one, which I can't remember, about frogs and toads. I don't remember what that was. But, you know, from a very young age, you are
Conditioning.
being fed that messaging. And then, you know, you think about all the Disney films. They all end in being rescued, don't they, by a prince? And all you kind of, the films that I grew up with in the 90s were all about being pursued by a man, love bombing, and often feeling like you're crazy. I mean, it's so normalised the way we've received those messages.
Yeah.
You know, it would be probably quite irrational if we didn't respond the way we do.
It's, I don't know, it's one of these situations where, I don't know, when you come out of a situation, I think I don't see, from my point of view, and I'm in a different country to you because I'm in Spain, but I don't see that there's a lot of support for that sort of abuse, the non-violent, non-physical, well, even the coercive controlling can have physical violence in it, because they can coerce you to do things like sexual things.
Yeah.
So that is physical. But, well, I forgot where I was at there.
We're
But
talking about the difference in the countries.
oh, that's right. Yeah, because I really don't think there's a lot of support, because here in Spain, it seems that the courts don't recognise that emotional, psychological abuse. I've researched it, looking at CEDAW, right, and looking at how the Grevio report comes out after they submit the details and the statistics and things, and reading of those reports. It's actually mentioned in that report that the foundations for domestic abuse, well, it's gender violence in Spain, say that there's not that many women who get convictions under the emotional and psychological abuse, which has been in law for a while now in Spain.
It has in Spain as well.
Yeah,
so
emotional and psychological abuse is a crime. And the other thing is that here in Spain, victims of gender violence, there is a specialist court. It's a women's court for gender violence, right? And that's the first court, the number one court in the first preliminary hearings. Whereas I don't think they have that in the UK. I think it's more.
No, I think they're piloting some. But no, it's not widespread.
Well, under the laws in Spain, a woman who is Spanish, right, is protected whether she is in Spain or in any other country in the world.
Okay.
That law is in Spain. But if you look at the UK law, anyone who is from the UK, England and Wales, and Scotland has separate laws as well,
Yeah.
but you're not protected if you're in a different country.
No.
And
So
the
you're in a gap, aren't you there?
in the gap. And the support's not there because in Spain, you obviously need a translator in order to get support because the vast majority of organizations don't speak English and you need to speak Spanish, or you have to pay for a translator. And the other thing is, like, if you're here and you try to get the help from a UK organization, as soon as you mention that you're not in the UK, oh, I'm sorry, we can't help because our funding doesn't stretch to outside. They've got funding to deal with people who are in the UK, but not help people who are outside of the UK. So it's very difficult. The only organisation that really did help, and I became a volunteer, was SEE, which is Surviving Economic Abuse.
Yeah.
And so I ended up being like a survivor sort of spokes thing, ambassador or whatever you call it, for that organisation, which I've been on to their Zoom meetings and things to talk about the different things that happen, just to give them information so that they can then campaign, because that's the vast majority of the work that they do.
Yeah, and there's probably, I don't know a great deal about Spain, but there is a large, kind of community, isn't there, of expats out there, living out there, and retiring out there. Yeah, and that's interesting actually, because my father is out there. I mean, I've not had contact with him for decades, but that's where he lives. So that's quite interesting. I've not really thought about that. And Sam is also an ambassador for economic abuse, because I think this is also something, and particularly for women later in life, because we've not had financial equity, women haven't had the same rights. We know that there's a gender pay gap, but also for women, kind of even, in the 70s, couldn't even get a loan out without their husband or father's signature. There's been a huge inequity there for women. So many women in later life are dependent on their husbands financially. So that's another barrier to being able to escape, just the fact that you are completely dependent. But you've obviously explained you've experienced economic abuse, but often that can be one of the first tools in their toolkit to exert power and control, creating that dependence.
Money is definitely weaponized. Even if you have money yourself, and you're trying to become more independent, or trying to do something to find work, or to start a new business or whatever it is, I think then they don't want you to be independent and earn your own money, because ultimately if you do, then that's a chance that you can then leave, and they've got abandonment issues. So then the money is weaponized. They'll be very kind and generous and give you with one hand gifts and holidays and then cash and whatever, even might say here's an allowance of something. But then a few weeks later, what they've done is like thrown back at you. And it's all part of the devaluation that goes on. Because they make you feel humiliated about your financial position as well if you're dependent on them. And it's just understanding from all of the things that the videos I've listened to, I've learned a lot about.
Pattern, because it is a pattern.
It's a pattern
we don't see.
It is. It's really insidious, I think. So there's the money, the humiliation, and there's a lot of different things that they can do. I mean, some of them will be think that they're the dominant man, they're the best thing that's ever happened to you, and you're lucky that you've got me, type of thing. That's another element of it. But you don't realize, you obviously you just like take what they've said and you don't understand it.
No, and often people around you will reinforce that message and tell you that you're really
Oh,
lucky.
yeah. You're really lucky to have
Because
that.
they're usually really charming outside of the relationship, aren't they?
Of course.
Yeah.
I mean, they start off like that.
Yeah.
That's the love bomb phase, because that's how they start off. They're kind, caring, generous, attentive, and want to do things to help you. And, some of them,
Everything
it's
the
like
movies tell you.
they want to fix you. Oh, I'm wanting to try to fix you. Like, I don't need fixing. But, that's sometimes how it plays out. So, yeah, I mean, going back to the victim blaming thing, and the courts, oh, it's horrendous. I mean, I stood in a gender violence court in Spain. I was actually advised by a lawyer to file a gender violence, and I didn't want to do it. And I felt every opposition to it, didn't want to do it. Even asked the solicitor, can you not just write to his solicitor and just negotiate something? Did you not hear what he said? I played a recording of something and he'd understood what it was. And that's when he told us. And that's how everything hit me, being told by a solicitor to file a gender violence complaint. But in the courts, it's like, you're not believed.
No.
I mean, that solicitor, that was his only bit of point of contact, was to tell us what to do. And then you'll get a free solicitor, and then you'll get a payment of money to help you, and then you'll get the free psychological help. Blah, 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 blah. That's what this solicitor did. But you have to have the court and the judge to say, yes, tick. Because if they don't say yes, tick, nothing. And that's how it is in Spain. And that's the emotional and psychological abuse, when women step forward to say, oh, but I was advised to do it.
Yeah.
And even in that was the gap. That was the gap. Because that lawyer didn't move forward and go with me to the police station, or even make the report so I could hand it to the officer and say, this is why I'm here, and have that support, instead of just saying, you'll get a free solicitor that turns up 30 minutes before the hearing, doesn't know anything about you, and doesn't know anything about what happened, or why you've even been told to file a complaint, because you've been in the police station, you're like a deer in the headlights, and you haven't a clue what you've got to say to them, because you've got no lawyer with you. That was what it was like.
So it's like it's the trauma all over again, isn't it? It's a system doing exactly the same as that person has done. Yeah.
And that's how I think a lot of women are re-victimized, re-traumatized. And it's it's no surprise that they get angry, and it's no surprise that their emotions are all over the place, and it's no surprise that people look at them and think, oh, they're crazy.
Yeah. And then they're probably told they are crazy, or they're depressed or anxious, or got a personality disorder. That's a really common one. And then they're medicated, which doesn't make them feel better, because, and for some people it will make them feel better, but for the majority it won't, because the problem isn't in their head.
No.
The problem is what they've experienced, and they need validation and support, not another medication.
Yeah, I mean, it's the whole society's beliefs. It's a belief system that's out there that doesn't understand, I think. And I mean, how can anyone? Because you said said earlier how long it's taken just to get recognition of a crime that's been there since 2015. So it does take time for the wheels to move along. They put the laws out there, but there's no point in having elaborate laws if they don't have the backup system to deal with it.
And the awareness and the awareness raising, the education. You know, marital rape in this country only became a crime in 1991 or 92. But still some people think marriage infers consent, and
Yeah.
we're, you know, we're 30 over 30 years. So yeah, law is part of the solution, but it isn't the solution at all.
It's the training and the raising awareness, and people and professionals as well, to actually understand what the crime is and what the laws in what it's meant to be, because otherwise you can't really help a person, can you really? Do you know, we've only got less than a minute, so we'll have to close it here, but it's been really great to have this little chat with you, Carrie.
You're welcome. I've loved it. Thank you, Loraine, for inviting me on.
Yeah, she'll have to do another one maybe.
Happily do that.